This episode is proudly supported by Westholme Australian Wagyu. Here's Stephen Sinclair from Jackson's on George.
In general, Westholme, I use several items on the menu from them. I always look to source products for their flavour. And with Westholme, I think they deliver that 100%. Australian Wagyu, in particular, Westholme is world class. Westholme is recognised for their quality all over the world. And then that's why, and when I tried it, and I absolutely love the flavour. This is, why I decided to put them on the menu.
Westholme believe that when nature leads, flavour follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
Setting targets and having goals is really important because, if we just say, oh, look, we just want to cut down on our food waste, but you've got no idea what you're trying to do or what you're trying to achieve, then it is, it doesn't really make much sense.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dirty Linen. My name is Dani Valent. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. I'm so excited to be in your ears. We chat about all things food and hospitality on Dirty Linen, tackling some of the big issues in food. One of the things we've continued to circle back to is the issue of food waste. We've chatted to chefs who do smart things with offcuts and peelings and scraps. We've talked to researchers who try to understand how best to spark change, and people who've drawn connections between food waste, climate change, and hunger. It's all important. Today, our guest is Sarah Hughes from End Food Waste Australia, a government-funded body working towards an Australia without food waste, starting with halving food waste by 2030. That date is creeping up to us rather quickly. Sarah is a one-time pastry chef who is now coordinating waste action plans. Sarah, welcome.
Hi, Dani. How are you doing?
I'm great. Really great to have you on the show. Just outline your work for us.
Yeah, okay. So End Food Waste Australia, as you said, it's a not-for-profit that looks at food waste across the whole supply chain. So right from the farmer, right through to the consumer. And we work, with individuals, with organisations, with food rescue organisations, with all levels of government, just looking at this big problem and working out how we can all sort of collaborate to come together. My particular area is the sector action plans, and these look at a particular sector. So, for example, the dairy sector or bread and bakery, the moment we're working on the food service sector, and getting people from across that supply chain to come together to work out, where is the food waste happening? Why is it happening here? And what are the things we can do about it? And really focusing on those just simple things that are going to have the biggest impact to make a difference.
So, let's talk about cafes and restaurants. Let's talk about it from the point of view of customers and people who work in them and perhaps own them. Why should they care about food waste?
Food waste, there's multiple reasons. First, if we think about, there's the environmental reasons. Globally, food waste is responsible for about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's food waste that's going into landfill, which is creating methane gas, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. But also there's all those associated losses with, food that's been grown, it's been transported, it's been prepared, cooked. And so there's all those other additional things that are having impact on the environment. There's also the economic costs of it, especially at the moment with supply costs being so high. Any food that's ending up in the bin, it's eating into people's profits. And then at a time when, we've got so many Australians who are struggling to get food on the table, to know regularly that they can provide their families with food, and then we're ending up with food in the bin. So there's those it's the triple bottom line of looking at those economic, environmental and societal reasons for why we shouldn't be wasting food.
Some of the stats in your report around cafes I found really striking and very shocking. So 1.2 million tonnes of food waste are created by the Australian hospitality industry every year. So it's 16% of Australia's food waste.
That's right. And if you want to put that into a more sort of tangible figure, if you think about that in meals, it's around about the equivalent food of about 4.6 million meals per day that are ending up in the bin.
Oh, and Another stat that struck me was each year a typical cafe generates a volume of food waste equivalent to 70,000 cups of coffee per employee.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, because a lot of businesses that we talk to say, I don't throw away too much. But when you start to sort of add it up, it does become, quite a considerable amount.
And financially, I mean, you mentioned that there are economic benefits to reducing food waste. Another stat in there is that for every dollar spent by industry to reduce food waste, hospitality will receive $9.50 in direct benefits. That's a pretty compelling stat as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's, if you think about it, you're just buying all those ingredients, you're paying the costs of, people to prepare them, to serve them, all your energy costs, your disposal costs from food waste as well. If you take all that into account, stop that food being wasted, then there's money savings there.
So what are some of the factors that contribute to waste in cafes and restaurants? So why are they particularly prone to such extravagant waste?
Look, I don't want to single out cafes and restaurants as extravagant waste, but we don't want to point the blame to anyone. I think it's part of just there's been thinking sort of for a long time that if you're dealing with food, you're going to have some food waste, and that's just part and parcel of working with food. So it's sort of readjusting that thinking that that food waste, it's not food waste, it's wasted food. So changing our thoughts around, well, there's a potential that, these vegetables that we've traditionally peeled, do we really need to peel them? The carrot tops or whatever that you cut off, is there some other way that we can think about using those things? Thinking about the ingredients as a whole. If you get a whole fish in and you're just using that fillet, can we think about using those lesser cuts, turning them into some roulettes or a croquette or something like that?
And what about, I guess, customer expectations? It's something that, hospitality or food service has this idea of abundance and generosity. I mean, how do we still, fulfill that need of looking after people with reducing food waste?
Yeah, this is the really, really challenging point because, a lot of restaurants and cafes are aware that they are trying to save their waste. They can change their operations, they can tighten up their ordering, their stock rotation, but then you've got that customer interface and, it's hospitality. We want the customer to have a good time. We want to protect our reputations to make sure that, everyone has had a good time when they've come into the restaurant. And we know there's sort of studies that look at what is the consumer sentiment towards wasting food. And most people, about 2/3 of people, are uncomfortable about leaving food on their plate, but it is also really closely intertwined as to the value they perceive they're getting from the restaurant. So it's this really fine balance. And I think that's where, communication is important. So if restaurants are making any changes, for example, we know that portion size is one of the biggest drivers of food waste. If you go down to your local pub and you've got a big serve of chips, it's hard sometimes to get through those. So things like reducing that portion size, but making the customer aware and saying, look, we're trying to reduce our food waste. So we've cut the portion size down a little bit. If you're still hungry, just come back and get some more. So it's just that transparent reasoning of why we're making changes.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, so much customer sentiment is around the amount of food that they're given. So it does feel like it has to be a conversation where so many people perceive the value in the amount of food that's on their plate. I suppose whether or not they end up eating it.
Yeah. And it's also, this is where front of house, because we talk a lot about the chefs and, it's also front of house are really important there as well, because they're the interface between what's going on in the kitchen and what's going on with the consumer. So having, good front of house, well-trained, who can talk to the customer and explain, why changes have been made, or, if thinking about how much people are ordering and perhaps suggesting that maybe, you could order this amount. And if you're still hungry, you can always order more.
What about menu design? That idea of abundance is also communicated through choice. What sort of menus, sort of strike alarm bells for you, and what menus do you look at and go, oh yeah, they're sort of onto it?
Yeah, I think, menus with huge arrays of choice, because you think if you've got, 20 mains on there, then you're having to carry all that stock for all those ingredients. So I think it's restaurants with sort of smaller menus and restaurants that are using, specials. So because that is a great way that if for some reason, you've got a surplus of ingredients and there's something that needs to be used, and you can use that in a special, and having flexible things on the menu. So things that are described that maybe, it comes with a green sauce or something. So it's not specified that it's coriander in there or it's parsley, but it's, you can say, well, I've got a bit of excess coriander here that I didn't use yesterday. I can pop that into the sauce. And so it's keeping that degree of flexibility.
And I think, a lot of these, I suppose, initiatives may come top down in businesses, but what sort of value have you seen in your research through speaking to people in all different roles in a business?
Oh, it's so important. Everybody needs to get involved. As you say, it needs to be driven sort of from top down. So people in the kitchen on the floor need to know that, the management have bought into this and are behind them. But everybody has a role to play. It's the chefs preparing the food. It's the front of house looking at the plates as they're coming back, seeing what's been left, communicating that. It's the dishwash when they're, looking at those leftovers on the plate as well. So yeah, everybody has a role to play. And again, it's that communication of talking about it. I think for a long time, there's been a bit of a stigma about food waste if you're working in a kitchen, that if you've, thrown something away, there's that, oh God, am I going to get into trouble? So people might hide it. So it's making it open, making it a safe space for people to talk about, to go, well, look, there was some wastage here. How can we change what we're doing to stop that from happening again?
Now, I was in a pretty nice restaurant last weekend and I just over-ordered. I guess it's a bit of a hazard as a food critic where you feel like you want to give the restaurant the best chance to shine. Exactly. Try a lot of dishes. But I'd done a lot of eating that weekend. I knew I had to eat the next day. This is, it's one of the hazards of my job, which I don't get much sympathy complaining about.
I know, my heart's bleeding for you.
Yeah, totally. But, it was a little bit hard for me to ask to take the leftovers home. But the food was so beautiful. I knew that, other people in my household would love it. But in a nice restaurant environment, I did feel a little bit unsure about asking to put the food in containers to take home. As it happened, I got over that. I did that. And, they were happy to box it up for me. I mean, where does that sit in this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, that is something that it's funny. There is that stigma around, asking to take food home. And but you're totally within your rights. There's no law to say that you can't do that. And, I think as a restaurant, for me, if it's food that I've created, I would rather see it, go home with the person than go into the bin. But we also need to make sure that we're not just shifting the waste somewhere else because, if we've served too much and someone takes food home, who knows, they might not get home in time. It's been hanging around. So there's those food safety issues. So then it gets discarded or people take it home, put it in the fridge with the best intention of eating it, but then don't get round to eating it. So we are kind of just potentially shifting the waste to somewhere else. So I think really it's more important to think about that, that portion control, the ordering at the start. But still, if there is food waste, that should be an option that we can take things home.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, I have also been in a scenario where I'm traveling and I know I'm not going to eat that food. If I did take it home, which would make the restaurant perhaps feel better, I know it's still going to end up in the bin. So I suppose that's not helping. And then we've got this container that we've got to deal with as well.
Yeah, I can't sort all that out as well. It's just the food waste. But we've got to be thinking about that. Should we, I always, like if I go out, I always have a container with me so that, like a Tupperware, so that if I know that I'm going to a great restaurant and that I might not finish everything, then I'll bring out my own container and pop it in there.
I've seen some initiatives in restaurants that are buffets or all you can eat where they fine people for leaving too much food on their plate. So for eyes are bigger than stomach, there's that sense of, I can eat all of that. I think I'll be able to eat it all, but then in the end I can't. I mean, are there other smart things that you've seen cafes and restaurants doing that you think really help tackle this problem?
I think again, it's that sort of that messaging of saying that, having those little sort of nudges and prompts to say, just think about how much you're taking. Are you going to eat it all? And again, it's that fine balance of we don't want to be preaching to our customers to make it an unpleasant experience for them. So it's just being really, really conscious about how you are sending those messages to them. In terms of like buffets and things, having smaller plates is really helpful because on a smaller plate, the same amount of food looks like a bigger portion than if it was on a big plate. And having smaller serving utensils, so like a spoon for like a stew or a salad or something like that if you've got a smaller spoon, people are naturally going to take smaller amounts, and making people aware that you can go back to the buffet and that you can have a second serve, that you don't have to take everything on that first pass.
Yeah, that's definitely good behaviour change.
Yeah.
What about the idea of like a full pie warmer or a full sandwich display, a full salad display? How can we perhaps reshape our thinking around these things?
Exactly. So that, again, it's for the operator sort of thinking about that towards the end of service, reducing the size of the platter, having smaller dishes out there, consolidating things so that, because, if people see a half-empty platter, they're less likely to take it than if they see a full platter. So if that platter is a bit smaller, then it still looks full, it still looks abundant, sort of consolidating those buffet tables, and then maybe you can, have an arrangement of flowers or an arrangement of whole fruit on there. So it still looks like abundance, but there's less food that, edible food that will then end up getting thrown away at the end of the day. And again, it's that communication to the customer that you can hold things back, but let them know and say, well, look, if you really want, this dish, we've actually still got some in the kitchen, it's been held at the correct temperature. So we're not going to end up throwing it out. It hasn't been, served to the customer. So there's no food and safety issues there. And so it's that communication piece.
I can imagine some people listening to this and thinking, oh, this all sounds great, but it's taking a lot of time. We know that people working in these environments are often time poor, perhaps understaffed, perhaps not as trained as they might be, still skilling up. What kinds of conversations can you have with people who feel like they'd love to do this, but it just sounds all too hard and too time consuming?
Yeah, I know, and it is challenging at the moment, and especially with the hospitality industry. There's a lack of skilled workers, and there are staff shortages. So yes, it is a challenge. All I can say is that a lot of these initiatives, they are quite simple things to introduce. So it's not like you have to go out and buy expensive equipment or, do a lot of really complicated things. It's just really trying to tweak a few things, and it can seem overwhelming. So you don't have to change everything at once. And if you can just make some little changes that can have a bit of a difference, it's all additive.
And I suppose if you could see that you were saving money, that would help because you'd be motivated. What are some of the ways that businesses could track that, like that they could notice the difference that it was making to the bottom line?
Yeah, I mean, certainly just weighing and recording your food waste is a good place to start. So just picking like a normal week of service and making a conscious effort to keep all that food waste, to weigh it all, and then that gives you an indication of the actual, amounts that you're throwing away. And then you can look at, your invoices, work out a basic cost of ingredients coming in, your labour costs, and that can give you some indication. And it's going to be very different for every different business. I think that's one of the challenges with hospitality, that there's so many, different sorts, sizes of operations. So I can't give you a dollar cost for each, that would fit for each scenario. But if you can sort of get some idea of how much you are wasting, make a few changes, and then sort of 2 to 3 months down the line, just reweigh again and just see, has that made any difference? And if you are doing that sort of weighing period, to be able to compare those two periods, it's good to have some sort of figure of like the number of covers that you served during that period, so that you can then compare, different weeks. Because if one week was really busy, you're probably going to have more food waste. And if one week was really quiet, so if you know how many people you've served during those periods, it's easier to compare those figures.
And I imagine communicating those figures to the whole team would be really powerful as well. Like if you had some sort of, even just a whiteboard tracking it in the back of house somewhere, that could be quite motivating for people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, setting targets and having goals is really important, because, if we just say, oh, look, we just want to cut down on our food waste, but you've got no idea what you're trying to do or what you're trying to achieve, then it is, it doesn't really make much sense. But if you can say, well, this week we wasted this much, and then we tried these things, and then we saved this amount of food. I think that's a good, always using those positive stories of, rather than, we wasted all this is what we saved, and translating that into, well, this could have been the number of dishes that we, could have served people instead.
I love that. So, Sarah, I understand that you were a pastry chef. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your journey to this type of work.
Yeah, so I was working at Humble Bakery in Sydney, which is part of the Pottery group, and I was doing a bit of study in sustainability, and I thought, well, how can I marry up sustainability and what I'm doing, in the kitchen here? And so the obvious thing for me was the food waste, because you're looking at it and going, well, it shouldn't be going in the bin, it shouldn't be going to landfill. So what can we do about this? So I started, looking at our own food waste and did some research, and I came across End Food Waste Australia. And at the time they were doing their bread and bakery sector action plan. So I actually became a participant in that sector action plan. And for me, it was just, it was so great coming from a small business where you do feel like, oh, am I really making a difference? And to this group of people, so there were, there were government people, there were food rescue people, there were, big organizations, medium-sized bakeries, and then little me as the artisan bakery. And so it was just that it was so great to see that, other people are doing things and having this one problem, but everybody looking at it from their different lens and their different angle, and how can we solve this together? So that was my introduction to End Food Waste Australia. And so I kept in touch with them, and eventually they gave me a job.
I love that. What are some of the ways that bakeries and pastry are prone to waste food?
Bakery, it's so challenging because everybody wants fresh bread. And so that's the biggest driver of food waste in bakeries, that people want to see, at the end of the day, people want to see there's still bread on the shelves, and they're going to get a fresh product. So there's that sort of drive to overproduce. So it's really, really looking at your forecasting and making sure you're getting it as tight as possible. And again, it's that communication to the customer that, if they come in and they want their particular type of bread that's sold out, to say, well, we don't have that one, but we've got this, this other bread here, and, we're trying to reduce our waste. So, you can try something else. And then thinking about ways that you can repurpose. If you do have bread left over at the end of the day, how can you repurpose that? Can it be turned into croutons for a salad, or breadcrumbs to go into the sausage roll mix?
Yeah, interesting. I think when the more you talk about food waste, and I've written lots of stories about it and chatted to lots of people about it, you realize we're all on the same side. Like, nobody wants to see food wasted. It's demoralizing to think about it when we spend all our time creating something beautiful and honoring the growers and the creativity of chefs. Like, nobody wants to see that go into the bin, but it is about finding the time and the strategies that will let us all walk together as we try to reduce it.
Yeah, it is. It's just, I say, it's just starting just to try and think about things a little bit differently, and having that tiny bit of space to breathe and think, well, maybe if I change this would work. And as I say, it's just not trying to tackle everything at once. I think that was a big lesson for me, that I kind of felt a bit overwhelmed. And so I just made some little changes and, saw the savings from that, which then, made me want to carry on. And then other people in the organization were just, like, thank you for doing this. we know it's a problem, and it sort of needs that champion within a business to say, right, we're going to do this. We're going to have a go.
Love it, Sarah. We'll put a link to the end food waste action plans in the show notes. I think they're so helpful. As you mentioned, there are lots of different sectors that are looked at: dairy, bakery, cafes. So I feel like anybody, even if you're just thinking about your food waste at home, will find lots of resources and things to think about. So really grateful to you for the work you're doing and for sharing it with us today.
Well, and thank you for giving us the time to talk about it.
It's important stuff. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.